Good evening and welcome to our Safmeds presentation to fulfill the requirements for BSU's SPCE 611 course. I'd like to introduce Group 4 of the Behavior Change Project, the Safmeds team. Anastasia Palumbo, Beatrice Solis, Cheryl Deason, Carrie Caltabiano, Mirakar Friedman, and Stephen Jekyll. In this presentation, we will begin with a brief introduction to our group's project and discuss the original study that was replicated. We will then review the existing literature on Safmeds and precision teaching. From there, we will go in depth with our replication of Stockwell-Eshelman 2010 study. The presentation that we choose to replicate was the Stockwell-Eshelman 2010 study on using Safmeds to promote fluency with Skinner's verbal behavior terms. The purpose of this study was to determine whether utilizing Safmeds flashcards, Stay All, Fast Minute, Everyday Shuffled, would increase the student's fluency in verbal behavior terms. Fluency is defined as the speed and accuracy in which one can recall specific information. The participant in this study was a 28-year-old female graduate student enrolled in an ABA PhD program. She had no prior experience using Safmeds and was required to use a set of cards for a verbal behavior course. The learner was required to conduct timing and chart her data independently. The learner studied the cards in her own home and ensured that no one else was present in the room when conducting time trials. Following the test outdate, follow-up timings were concluded in the same setting with up to 2 other individuals present. For the study, a set of 60 verbal behavior Safmed cards were used along with a battery-operated timer, a data sheet, and daily per-minute acceleration chart. Dependent variable was the amount of correct responses the learner emitted during a 1-minute timing. For the procedure, the learner began with untimed study of the cards, in which the learner would read the definition on the back of the card and then say the term on the front of the card. The learner separated the cards into a correct pile and a not yet pile until each card was reviewed. The correct response was defined as saying the term as it was printed on the card. A not yet response was defined as laying the card down without saying anything, or where the learner stated a response that did not closely match the card. After that, the learner repeated studying the cards from only the not yet pile. Prior to beginning the time session, the cards were shuffled. Each timing was 1 minute. During time sessions, the learner sat in upright position with the deck of cards placed in her left hand. Upon starting the timer, the learner read the definition visible on the top of the deck, stated the definition out loud, and then placed the card into a correct pile or the not yet pile. Timings occurred for 10 of 14 days, and the learner had the Safmeds deck and were conducted between 1 to 6 times per day. Upon completion of the time session, the learner recorded the number of correct and not yet responses on the data sheet and then input the data on the acceleration chart. Follow-up timings were conducted for 4 days, in which 1 timing was conducted each day, and these were also included on the acceleration chart. Throughout the course of the study, the data recorded on the standard acceleration chart shows a jaw learning picture, which indicates that the learner had an increase in correct responding and a decrease in not yet responding over time. The range of correct responses were 16 to 44 per minute, and the range of not yet responses was 0 to 4 per minute. The data indicated that the aim of 40 correct responses per minute was met. Follow-up timings were conducted 3 weeks before the test out date, and the data collected showed that fluency was retained over time. These findings support the hypothesis that Safmeds is a beneficial method for increasing fluency for graduate level students enrolled in ABA coursework. I will now turn it over to Mirakar, who will discuss similar findings in the literature overview.
Okay, so the first article I'll review was written in 1988 by Carl Binder. In the article, Binder begins by questioning how we know that a student has mastered certain knowledge. Traditionally, in an academic setting, mastery criteria is determined by what Binder refers to as criterion referenced instruction, in which the learner demonstrates only the accuracy of the criteria of the student curriculum. Under this assumption, mastery is met when 100% accuracy is demonstrated. But Binder suggests that this is not the correct way to determine mastery and offers fluency as the true definition of mastery, and that's because it incorporates the speed and the accuracy of demonstrated knowledge. So precision teaching was originated by Lindsley in 1964 at the University of Kansas. The key components included setting a time-based mastery, setting a criteria for each curriculum step, ensuring several opportunities for daily practice, and using timed measurements to chart performance on a standard behavior chart, and that's so that progress can be monitored. So using fluency standards and procedures, many researchers have been able to identify students in need of special help as well as track their progress. And the results of all this research suggest that most students who utilize precision teaching in school gained mastery in curriculum material when practice timings were done each day. The improvements were significantly large and they were achieved in a short amount of time. And an extra added bonus to this was that the cost of the materials for this method were very low. So as for recommendations, Binder claims that precision teaching can be a useful tool in the classroom setting for improving academic achievement. And lastly, he states that ideally schools should incorporate several brief timings within the classroom setting, as well as teach parents to utilize these timings at home with their children too. So this next article this next study was done in 1992 by Stump et al. He conducted a study in which training seminars on precision teaching were held for teachers of students with disabilities, focusing on vocabulary words. The participants of this study were 18 teachers, 6 facilitators, and 351 students. Of the students, 115 were special education students, and of that group, 91 of them had a learning disability. So during the workshops, teachers were taught through demonstration how to use the Safmeds, and were then taught how to prepare the materials, including the computer program, which generated vocabulary quizzes. And these quizzes served as the dependent measure. After the seminar, the teachers then utilized the approach in the classroom. Before beginning intervention, baseline data was collected using the generated quizzes. During the intervention phase, the vocabulary practice sheets, which were the Safmeds, were introduced. 3 days per week, students would pair up and quiz each other for only 5 to 10 minutes per day, and then take the same computer-generated quiz. And as a result of this study, most of the students improved their quiz scores. All but one teacher began utilizing the approach in their classrooms regularly, and both teachers and students also reported that the approach was actually pretty enjoyable. In 2004, Team Candy wrote an article discussing the problems in current classrooms that factor into students with disabilities not achieving higher education despite wanting to. So he says, despite the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Section 504 amendments, and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which all removed barriers that prevented students with disabilities from participating in higher education, only 53% of students with disabilities attained a degree within 5 years, as of 2004. So some major factors that contribute to this failure in the classroom lies within how the instructor conducts the class. So for the most part, classes are comprised of a lecture in which students are required to take their own notes. And this is a brand new process for all college students, and for students with disabilities, this can be even harder. On top of this, students must find time to review their notes and make sense of them in order to study for the exams. And that's a difficult process for any new student. Concludes in the article with listing 10 strategies for improving these outcomes. And one of the most important of these was fluency building. He suggests that Safmeds is an effective way to achieve speed and accuracy on course material, as long as the students are provided several opportunities within class and outside of class to practice. This next study was done in 2009 by Beverly, Hughes, and Hastings. They wanted to test whether or not precision teaching would increase student exam grades. So the participants for this study were pulled from a psychology statistics course, all of whom made below the 50th percentile on their first exams. The participants were split into two different study groups, a precision teaching group in which students studied every day using Safmeds cards, and those terms were taken from the textbooks listed on them, and they met regularly with their instructors also to review their progress. And the second group was a treatment as usual group in which students continued attending lectures and studying from their textbooks as usual. So the results of this study indicated that the precision teaching group built fluency faster and maintained the highest test scores for the remainder of the semester compared to the treatment as usual group. All right, and lastly, in the final study conducted in 2013 by Baird and Stein, an ABA college student used a 30-card deck of Safmeds to study vocabulary terms for 2 uncovered chapters in the course. The vocabulary and the cards were chosen by the instructor. The student studied the first set of 15 cards every morning and the second set of 15 cards every night. Each session lasted only 5 to 10 minutes, and study sessions with the Safmeds were done for the last 4 days before the quiz was given by the instructor. Based on the quiz results, Baird and Stein concluded that Safmeds may be a very important study tool, and they also considered it to be a superior study method.
Thanks, Mari-Car. I'm now going to talk about the study that we replicated. The purpose of our replication study was for the participants to implement the Safmeds strategy to increase fluency of 60 ABA terms, which were agreed upon by the participants. The target behavior in this study was behavioral fluency, characterized by speed and accuracy of behavior terms. Each participant attempted to provide the highest number of correct responses per 1-minute trial. A correct response is defined as an occasion in which the learner correctly provides a verbal response that matches the answer provided on the back of the corresponding Safmeds card being viewed. An example, the Safmeds card reads 1 + 2, and the learner verbally out loud says 3. A non-example is the card reads 1 + 2, and the learner thinks in their head 3 but does not say it out loud, or they say an incorrect response. For the purpose of this study, each participant was required to have the following materials: 60 3-inch by 5-inch flashcards with the selected terms printed on them, an audible timer that is capable of counting down 1 minute, a flat surface clear of any other items, such as a table or a desk, a frequency data sheet, which can be found on Appendix A, a pen, and a pen or a pencil. Prior to the timings, the learners counted the deck of Safmeds cards to ensure that all 60 cards in the deck were accounted for. The learners sat in an upright position, holding the cards in their left hand. They looked at the front of the card, which had the definition on it, and provided a vocal response to match the term on the back of the card, which had the behavioral term. The learner used their right hand to flip the card over after viewing the term. Correct responses were placed in one pile, and missed or skipped turns were placed in a separate pile. After the learner went through the entire deck of cards, they went back and reviewed the cards that they missed one additional time. Once the missed terms were reviewed, the learner then shuffled all of the cards prior to the timed trial.
Thank you, Anastasia. So after completing the practice study of their 60 Safmeds cards, the participants would prepare and get ready for their 1-minute recorded trial. Sitting in an upright position, the learner would hold the cards in their left hand, and press start on the timer with their right hand. The learner would then read the definition on the front of the card and vocally emit a response for a term that matched on the back of that card. After emitting a vocal response, the learner used the right hand to flip the top card over and set it down on the flat surface, separating it into the correct pile or the not yet pile. This process continued for 1 minute until the alarm sounded. The learner would then count the cards in the correct pile and record that number on Appendix A, as it can be seen on this slide here. So for our experimental design, the original study used acceleration design, but in order to meet the requirements for this SPCE 611 course, which is showing a functional relationship, we were recommended to use a changing criterion design, which would incorporate the delivery of a reinforcement based on the participants' achievement of phase criterion levels. So the changing criterion design was replicated amongst all 6 students, and we took our first 9 days of data and as the baseline. With that, we averaged all of those trials together and increased that by 15% in order to create the criterion level for the phase 1. Once each participant had met or exceeded the criterion level set 3 consecutive trials, you would then take the average of those 3 trials and again increase it by 15%, which would provide you with the next phase criterion level. Each time that one of the participants achieved a phase change, we would also deliver the reinforcement, which we set as a preferred beverage for each of us.
Thanks, Stephen. To ensure treatment fidelity, the participants came up with a checklist to score the treatment integrity. Overall integrity scores calculated by the number of integrity standards met divided by the total number of integrity standards multiplied by 100. Each participant was required to complete the checklist as his or her primary scorer once for every day that the timings were conducted. Inter-observer data was taken for treatment fidelity using the same checklist. Participants took IOA data over Google Hangouts a minimum of 2 times per phase.
So as you can see on the screen here, this is the graphing of my results. So during my baseline, I did show an increase in responses over the 9 days with a range from 5 correct responses to 13. And it came out to an average of 8 correct responses. So with that average of 8, it set my first phase 1 criterion goal at 9 correct responses, which as you can see with my 3 data points being much higher, I was easily able to obtain with a range of 12 to 13 and a rounded average of 13 correct responses. With that, it set the next phase at 17 correct responses. Excuse me. It set it at 12 to, I'm getting confused here, I'm sorry, my apologies. The final phase was set at 17 trials and at a score of 17 correct responses. Over 17 trials, it was very difficult for me to achieve that. I only achieved 17 correct responses twice. I had a range of 13 to 17 correct responses and an average of 15 correct responses throughout that entire phase.
All right, this is my graph. And for baseline, the range was 6 and the average was 16. So moving on to phase 1, the criterion for phase 1 was 18. The average was 18 and the range was 4. Moving on to phase 2, the average was 17 and the range was a little bit bigger at 14. And it was a little bit higher of a criterion for phase 2 at 21 correct responses. So as you can see, baseline and both baseline and phase 1 show an increasing trend, and phase 2 shows a lot of variability because the timings did not occur every day. And during IOA, I had low scores due to reactivity and because it was hard to hold the cards in front of the camera so the observer could read the cards.
Okay, this is my graph, and the trend for the baseline is flat. Phase 1, 2, and 3 show an increasing trend. Phase 2 and 3 show a slight variability. My baseline average was 9 correct responses in 1 minute. My criterion goal for phase 1 was 10 correct responses in 1 minute. And as you can see, I met my criterion goal in just few trials. Then I moved on to phase 2. My phase criterion goal there was 13 correct responses in 1 minute. And as you can see, it took me several trials to meet phase 2 criterion. Phase 3 criterion goal was 14 responses in 1 minute. And I met my goal, and my highest response was 16 responses in 1 minute.
Show your microphone.
This is my graph, and my baseline range was 0 to 4. My baseline average of 2, and my phase 1 criterion I put at 4, which was met, and my phase 1 range went from 0 to 7 with an average of 4, and the phase 2 criterion 8, which I had not met yet, but it shows stability with a 0 to 4 correct answers through the end of phase 1, then a slight variability in the number of correct answers from 2 to 7. And the plotted data is recorded in the lower level of the graph. And trials 1 through 7 did a decrease in trend, while trials 16 through 21 showed a 0 trend, but trials 34 through 36 showed an increase in trend.
Okay, so this is my graph. So I do have an increasing trend also until I get to phase 3. So I'll start with baseline. My baseline average was 16.5 corrects, with the range going from 6 to 23. Baseline, or the average for my baseline, set my criteria for phase 1 at 23 corrects. I was able to meet that within 5 trials. So the average for phase 1 was 22, with a range from 18 to 25. Setting my criterion for phase 2 at 27 corrects. It took me a little, or just about the same time to meet that. My average was 25.5 with a range of 22 to 30. My criterion for phase 3 was 33 corrects, which, as you can see from looking at the graph, was a little bit harder for me to reach. I kind of decrease a little bit here where there's some IOA sessions, and then I just kind of plateau right below that line. So it was getting a little bit hard to reach that criterion. But overall for phase 3, my average was 27.5 with a range of 12 through 31. And I've got the most variability in phase 3, and I attribute that to the IOA sessions. And also, I did not conduct trials every single day. I did go weekends without conducting the trials. So you can kind of see on the graph where I'm either leveled out or increasing, and then I'll have one data point that goes down a little bit and then increases again. That's kind of the start of the new day after a weekend. So there's a little bit of variability there.
Okay, this is my graph. My baseline range was 12 to 25 with an average of 18, which set my criterion for phase 1 at 21. My phase 1 range was 21 through 23 with an average of 22, which you can see I met in just my first 3 trials there. So I moved on to phase 2, which had a criterion of 25. My phase 2 range was again met pretty quickly. I had a range of 22 to 25 with an average of 24, which set my criterion for phase 3 at 27. Like Marikar, my phase 3 had the most variability. I had a range of 21 to 29 with an average of 24. like my colleagues, I did experience a decrease in correct responses during IOA sessions, perhaps due to reactivity and the added motor movement necessary via webcam. And as you can see, as the criterion levels neared 30, it became increasingly difficult for me to reach my phase criterion. And my experience was that in the later phases, I was actually achieving fewer incorrect responses, but it was just simply hard to complete the higher number of trials given the 1 minute time limit. So now Beatrice and I are going to go over some general results from our study and wrap up with a discussion. Course of the study, fluency in ABA terms increased for all group participants. As in the original study, fluency was measured by speed in addition to accuracy per 1 minute timings. The highest number of correct responses across participants ranged from 7 to 31 responses. 2 of our participants completed 2 phase changes and the other 4 reached 3 phase changes in our study. The changing criterion graphs for some participants depicted an increasing trend while others showed more variability. As previously mentioned in our graph presentations, we contribute the variability to gaps in time between trials run and reactivity during IOA sessions. Overall, however, the Safmeds method was successful in increasing ABA term fluency.
Okay. Here we have here continue with the results. For most of the participants' graphs, the level of the data path in treatment is different than in baseline. The trend level baseline is flat and the level of intervention is ascending. The variability of baseline intervention is variable. We are confident that responses did change due to the level and trend change.
So we did have some limitations to our adaptation of this study. Though in the original study, follow-up timings were conducted at 3, 4, and 11 weeks after completion. Due to time constraints during the study replication, follow-up timings weren't performed. Therefore, we were unable to determine if increased fluency was in fact maintained over time, as they could in the original study. Another limitation of this study was the use of only 1 set of flashcards for all sessions. Future research should target the implementation of multiple sets of Safmeds flashcards with alternate verbiage of the same terms to ensure generalization. Research, such as a study by Mendel in 2013, has raised questions in regards to if other stimuli, such as sight words, pencil marks, or bends in the flashcards were actually accountable for correct responses, versus the participants reading the entire definition as is intended with Safmeds precision teaching. Some participants in our study did note that some cards became slightly marked after repeated use. Throughout the IOA sessions in this study, a decrease in correct responding was seen almost consistently across all of our participants. One suggestion was that the increased physical effort required to perform trials via webcam contributed to the decreased levels of responding. So we were used to, during our independent trials, simply reading the card and putting it on the flat surface, and via webcam we had to read it and actually hold it up to the camera so that the observer could see. So we were a little bit delayed in those sessions. And this decrease could also be due to observer reactivity, wherein participants' behaviors are positively or negatively altered due to the awareness that they're being watched. This effect could be controlled by using a double-blind experiment in future adaptations, wherein those who are receiving a test treatment are concealed from both the experimenters and the participants until after completion. Future research could also control this effect by using an unobtrusive observation or recording participants in their natural environments. Since the original study didn't include IOA sessions, we do wonder if that participant was able to reach the goal of 40 correct responses per minute because she did not experience the limitations of IOA that our group encountered.
I'm going to continue with the limitations. Weak reinforcement. As a group, we had few ideas of what reinforcement system to implement for our intervention. Some ideas we consider were a glass of wine each time a phase was reached, deliverance of chocolate each time a phase was reached, and the implementation of a money pot system to reinforce ourselves with a specified dollar amount each time a phase was reached. It was recommended to agree on one reinforcer, and so we all decided reinforcement to be a preferred drink, such as Diet Coke, beer, wine, tea, etc. We conducted a stimulus preference assessment in the form of asking each other. We identified preferred drinks to likely serve as a reinforcer. We did not conduct a trial-based method to determine a common reinforcer. A trial-based method would have consisted of presenting a stimuli to each participant in a series of trials, and the participant's response to the stimuli would have been measured as an index of preference. We instead use open-ended questions such as, what do you like? And gave choices such as, would you like wine or chocolate, for example. An important question that arose during our study was change in rate of responding due to reinforcement or acceleration, that the change acceleration or deceleration in rate of responding over time. Rate of responding is really important because research shows that the more rapid influence the rate of correct responding, the more durable the learning. Change in rate of responding was not necessarily due to reinforcement, but due to practicing. In the original study, the participant practiced every day for 1 minute and used a standard acceleration chart to track her responses. Why standard acceleration chart might be a better choice. It's important to know that when doing precision teaching, you want to analyze how the frequency of behavior changes over time. The relative quantitative relations that are effectively communicated on the standard acceleration chart is rate of responding. That's why standard acceleration chart might be a better choice for target behaviors such as behavior fluency.
So to conclude, the study we chose to replicate examined the use of Safmeds strategy in acquiring fluency in ABA terms. We chose this study because fluency in ABA terms is obviously a behavior that would benefit all of us in our coursework for our master's classes, and because 5 of the 6 of us do plan to sit for the BCBA exam. Though variability in trends were depicted, overall fluency in these terms was achieved, and we do feel that Safmeds' method was beneficial in improving our fluency. Future research could expand on this study by examining not only the acquisition of fluency of terms, but also how and if that fluency generalizes to the application of that knowledge in different forums, such as real-world application, course assignments, and various tests, such as the ABA Master's Course exams and the BCBA exam. And that concludes our Safmeds Group 4 presentation. Thank you for listening.